05:05 local time. A U.S. Navy destroyer is threading the crowded tanker anchorages of the Persian Gulf at 30 knots with every radar and radio silenced, racing for a firing point 55 miles off the Iranian coast. In her cells, 8 Tomahawk cruise missiles assigned to Darkovan, the construction site where Iran is trying to restart its nuclear program. If the Iranians detect either them or the missiles, their one chance at demolishing Iran's next nuclear reactor can be lost. The officer of the deck is conning 9,000 tons of destroyer through the anchorage by bearing drift, binoculars, and nerve. The loaded tankers ride at anchor across miles of water, waiting for their slot through the strait. Dow's cut between them on no schedule and no lights. One radar sweep would make this easy. One radar sweep is the one thing she cannot do. Iranian listening posts ring this Gulf, and they don't need to see a warship to find one. They just need her to speak. Once. On the chart table, Iran's known coastal radars are drawn as red fans spilling off the shoreline, and her track threads the seams between them. Where a fan can't be dodged, she hides in the crowd, one more hull in a river of hulls. She's racing to a launch basket, a box of ocean drawn weeks ago by a planning cell 7,000 miles away. Every Tomahawk route begins at a first pre-planned waypoint, a fixed point each missile has to reach before the rest of its route means anything. 8 missiles, 8 routes, 8 first waypoints. And this stretch of water is the only place on Earth within reach of all 8 at once, and she has to be standing on it in 4 minutes. At 05:09, she crosses the line on her navigator's chart and pulls the throttles back. 8 knots, a lazy circle. To any satellite that happens to be looking, she's a retiree trolling for fish. At 05:12, a square hatch on the forward deck blows open. The first missile climbs out on a column of white fire. The roar arrives half a second behind it, a flat shove you feel in your chest before your ears catch up. The missile pitches over, wings swing out, the turbofan lights, and it drops away toward the water. 7 more follow close behind. Hatch, flame, pitch, wings, drop. 2 minutes later, the deck is empty, and the sailors are arguing about what eggs they're going to get for breakfast. 200 miles south, on the flagship's Combat Information Center, a strike controller watches 8 new tracks bloom on his display and starts counting down 30 minutes. The 8 missiles drop to the wave tops and spread apart. Booster casings tumble into the Gulf behind them. 2 run north, 2 swing wide south, 2 hold the middle, and the last pair banks west, away from everything. On the bridge wing, an officer watches the last exhaust plume flatten and disappear. 8 booster flames in 2 minutes have marked her position for every camera and coastal battery on that shore. An hour of silence spent in 2 minutes of fire. 55 miles offshore is closer than any captain wants to hold a destroyer, inside the reach of Iran's coastal anti-ship batteries, and he's known it the whole run in. Now the destroyer turns for open water at flank speed. Somewhere up that coast, anti-ship crews are working the same arithmetic from the other side, and her next hour belongs to the throttles, half an hour to Darkovan. Whether it ends at a reactor foundation or in pieces on the floodplain now belongs to 8 small turbofans. Across the horizon, the watching has already started. Inside the Ghadir site outside Ahvaz, a radar crew 4 minutes into the morning shift inherits a sky that just changed. Returns bloom out of the northern Gulf. That corner of the scope had read empty all week. The operator leans in. The smears refuse to sharpen. Big, slow blooming, drifting west like weather that moves wrong. The lead controller keys the IRGC net inside a minute. Raid inbound, bearing 090. Count uncertain. The Ghadir array is more than 100 antenna masts standing on a ring outside Ahvaz. This is Iran's over-the-horizon early warning radar. It bounces long wavelength signals off the upper atmosphere and reads what comes back. A ground station near the border sees aircraft at 370 miles and ballistic launches at nearly 700, clean past the curve of the Earth. The destroyer spent an hour dodging every radar that transmits. The one that catches her work is the one that only listens. But that atmospheric bounce smears every return. What Ghadir hands its operators is warning in tens of miles, never a track a missile can fly on. It's like thunder from a storm still below the horizon. You know it's coming, and roughly from where, but nobody can tell you where the lightning lands. Every actual shot still has to come from a battery that finds these missiles with its own line-of-sight radar. The nearest one is already spinning up. 21 miles out, the lead pair crosses the coast and climbs just enough to hold clearance over land, below the water towers, above the date palms, wings shadowing the irrigation ditches 160 feet over the Khuzestan floodplain. On a levee south of the coast road, a farmer feels the ground shiver before his ears catch the engines, two gray shapes, gone behind the palms before he finishes the turn. The tee in his hand still steaming. The western pair peels off toward the Iraqi border 40 degrees away from the target. The Tomahawk's whole trick is a trade. It gives up speed for a specific kind of invisibility. It hugs the wave tops below 50 feet over water. Over land, it cruises between 100 and 160 feet. Down there, the planet itself stands between it and every ground radar in the province. Picture a man crossing a mile-wide pasture flat on his belly. The farmhouse porch never sees him until the fence. The problem with crawling past this particular farmhouse is that it keeps a gun on the roof. At Ahvaz, atop a truck-mounted mast, the radar that actually guides the shots is climbing to full power. The long-range battery at Ahvaz is good, cued by Ghadir, sector locked on the inbound arc, radar beam pressed flat onto the horizon and hunting. The moment the lead pair crests its line of sight, the crew fires. Two interceptors punch out of their canisters on cold launch ejection charges, tip over onto the threat heading, and light off mid-air in flares of orange flame. Now look at the top of that mast, a flat square array, the 30N6E2 radar NATO calls Tombstone. It's the business end of the S-300PM U-2, Iran's longest-range Russian-built air defense system. The rounds it fires are 48N6E2 interceptors. A full battery guides up to 12 against 6 targets at once. Each arrives at better than Mach 6 behind a 180-kilogram fragmentation warhead, 400 pounds of steel and explosive. But the interceptor is half-blind by design. It homes on radar energy the Tombstone paints onto the target, and that beam has to hold unbroken from launch to impact. It's flashlight tag. The interceptor only sees what the ground keeps lit, and the instant the beam loses the runner, the interceptor goes blind. Both interceptors go supersonic within 2 seconds. Closing on a target, the Tombstone is held for barely 3. The first 48N6E2 detonates 260 feet high and behind the lead missile's wake. The second buries its steel in an irrigation levee, and the lead Tomahawk flies through the falling dirt and holds course. Ahvaz had every reason to expect a hit and nothing to show for it, and the reason is geometry, not gunnery. That Tombstone sits 80 feet up on a lattice mast, hunting a target at 160. A radar that low and a target that low only see each other out to about 28 miles. Beyond that, the Earth's curve is physically in the way. You could double the transmitter's power and not buy back a single foot. You can be the best shot in Iran and still lose to a planet that curves. That's because the 200-kilometer range on the spec sheet only exists against something at altitude. 28 miles at this speed is a 3-minute window. Reaction time eats the front of it. The planners drew the routes to cross this battery's arc rather than fly at it. The Tombstone spent its whole engagement walking its beam through ground clutter behind a fast-crossing target. Deflection lead on a bird skimming the grass. The Ahvaz crew did everything right and bought Iran 2 craters in a wheat field. All 4 pairs are through the coastal belt. Now the province tries something new, something that doesn't shoot at the missiles at all. At Khuzestan Air Defense Sector Headquarters, the sector commander watches 4 separate low tracks appear and vanish on the plot. Each battery's radar owns a Tomahawk for under a minute before the horizon takes it back. The raid is 12 minutes from Darkovan. Every man in this room knows it, and every one of them is watching him. On the plot, the western pair makes no sense. 2 missiles driving for the Iraqi border, 40 degrees off any line to the site. One officer argues decoys. Another argues an Iranian-backed militia headquarters in Basra, a second target nobody was briefed on. The commander lets them argue and keeps his eyes on the other 6. The argument is still going when the next decision arrives. Each side holds a target this low inside the same 28 miles that beat Ahvaz. At this speed, that arc is 60 seconds wide. 4 radars, each holding the baton for about a minute, and the handoff keeps hitting the ground. The command post is trying to weld 1 continuous track out of 4 flickering ones, and every weld takes time it doesn't have. No continuous track, no shot. So the commander keeps chasing bearings. He searches for the switch that covers the whole province at once. Jammer trucks across Khuzestan light off. High-powered transmitters throw a wall of noise across the GPS band. Inside the missiles, the satellite fix starts to rot. The trucks doing it look like nothing. Masts and rotating dishes clustered around one job, burying the faintest signal anyone in the province depends on. A GPS signal arrives from a satellite 12,000 miles up at a power below the natural background noise, fainter than static. The receiver only finds it because it knows what exact code to listen for. A ground jammer doesn't have to be clever, only close and loud. A few hundred watts from a truck outshouts the satellite across an entire province. It's like trying to hear a phone speaker across a stadium while the whole crowd roars. The phone hasn't stopped talking, it just stopped mattering. If this raid navigates by GPS, the province just won the morning. The switch comes with a bill. Every airliner over southern Iran just lost its GPS too, and Ahvaz approach control goes back to paper strips. The province is blinding itself to save one construction site. One by one, 8 Tomahawks flag their satellite fix as garbage. Not one of them wobbles. 20 seconds after the jammers light off, the lead pair sweeps the canal cut. It takes its fix and presses on. Look here on the missile's belly, at the flush radar altimeter window the size of a coffee cup. That's how the airframe found itself without asking the sky for permission. Under the skin, a ring laser gyro and 3 accelerometers keep a running count of each turn and climb since the deck. Nothing arrives from outside. There's nothing to jam. Left to itself, the gyro's picture drifts about a mile for every hour of flight, enough to land the missile half a mile wide at Darkovan. So every 15 to 30 miles, the belly altimeter sweeps a strip of ground. It measures elevation to about a foot, matches that strip against a contour map loaded before lunch, and the drift snaps back to zero. And 40 miles south, the battery that's been living on cues doesn't need GPS either. That canal cut wasn't an accident. The matcher needs about 50 feet of rise and fall before it can lock, and much of the Khuzestan floodplain sits under 10. Every stretch looks like every other stretch. So every checkpoint sits on a levee, a riverbank, or a rise toward the Iraqi border. A few feet of man-made edge give the altimeter something to grip. The men who drew these routes read an enemy province's elevation charts closer than the farmers who live on it. 20 minutes into the jamming, the tracks on the sector commander's plot haven't wavered a degree. He's spending megawatts against missiles that stopped listening to the sky before he finished his first order. He has no way to know that. Somewhere in Tehran, this morning is now someone's problem. A missile designed when disco was still cool just ignored the country's entire electronic warfare budget by touching the dirt. And in a Pentagon budget office, a 40-year-old line item just quietly justified itself. On the highway out of Ahvaz, the day shift buses for the Darkovan site pull away from the depot on schedule. 40 minutes of road between the depot and the fence. Nobody's told them anything. 200 miles south, the strike controller reads 8 incoming data bursts every few seconds. Position, fuel, engine RPM. Each missile's own math on its arrival second. If you look here at the low dome fared into the missile spine, you'll see why. That dome is a satellite antenna and it runs both ways. The missile doesn't decide anything. A new mission can be typed on the flagship and pushed to the airframe in under a minute. It can move the aim point, the run-in bearing, or the arrival second. What it can't change is the warhead the missile left with, or the fuel in its tank. It's a marathon runner calling home at every mile marker. You can hand him any finish line his legs can still reach. The doctrine name is human on the loop. If Tehran announced civilians on site, any of these 8 could be pulled off its target, just minutes from impact. The controller has one eye somewhere else entirely. The day shift buses left Ahvaz 11 minutes ago. 40 minutes of road ahead of them, and the missiles arrive in 7. The margin clears with no room to spare. His hand stays off the console. Nobody calls. 7 minutes out, the 4 attack headings begin to bend toward the same square mile. Their paths cross the arc of one waiting battery. On the flagship's threat display, the Ahvaz S-300 burns bright, position updated with every sweep it makes. The Bavar battery south of it reads 3 days stale. The battery that shot is no longer the problem. The one that hasn't is. South of Ahvaz, a flat radar panel tilts upright on its truck bed, aimed where the eastern pair has to appear. In the command cab, the battery commander heard it all over the net. Ahvaz shot and missed. He has the one thing Ahvaz never had: time. The two missiles bending toward his corridor are the only two he can see. But no one has told him there are 6 more. He knows what a radiating panel is in this campaign, a return address for the next American anti-radar missile, and he brings it to full power anyway. It's the air defense equivalent of answering the phone knowing it's a debt collector. This crew answers because their orders don't come with a mute button. The eastern pair crests his horizon. A canister vents. An interceptor streaks up on a tail of flame. That flame belongs to a Bavar 373, the best long-range air defense system Iran builds itself, fielded in 2019. Riding it is a 2-stage Sayyad 4B, the longest arm Iranian air defense owns. The panel steers its beam electronically. This crew isn't searching with it. The net handed them a bearing 10 minutes ago. The panel stares at one narrow corridor, waiting. All that stillness for 2 seconds of work. A few repeated looks off the same object build a track file in 4 to 6 seconds. The computer figures out where the two will meet, and the Sayyad 4B does the rest. It ejects vertically, tips onto bearing, and boosts toward that meeting point until its own nose radar wakes up for the endgame. Tehran claims this system sees past 300 kilometers and shoots nearly as far. Claims, because nobody outside Iran has watched it try. Against a target down in the grass, none of that exists. The whole chain has to finish inside the 35 kilometers between horizon and fence. It's a champion marksman with a world-class rifle. The range officer only uncovers the target for the last 2 seconds. The Sayyad 4B arcs over and comes down the intercept line at the eastern pair, nose radar live. The hard part isn't the chase, it's the last half second. The proximity fuse has to fire in the sliver of space where the fragment cone and the target meet. Against a crossing target this low, the fuse reads target return and ground return in the same breath. Dirt splash looks like a target arriving early. It fires a beat high. The cone of steel blooms above and behind. Most of it goes into the sky. A handful catches the Tomahawk's 6th left wing. Not a stop, a graze. The missile shrugs, corrects, and flies on with a bent outboard control surface. The Bavar crew slews for a second shot, 23 rounds still ready across the battery's 6 launchers. But the bearings have already crossed out of their arc. 7 clean missiles and 1 wounded one, 90 seconds out. 4 pairs in their final turns. Noses locked north, east, south, and west, all on the same fence line. The whole plan visible in one picture. The western pair's 20-minute run toward Iraq is already turned back. In the command post, the Basra argument just lost. The 8 Tomahawks left the cells over a 2-minute window because a Mark 41 fires 1 cell at a time, not in a shotgun blast. So the planning cell cut each route to fit the launch order. Even the shortest way in, the weaving northern run, is about 262 route miles. The western dogleg, about 280. That 18-mile difference at 550 miles an hour works out to 2 minutes of flight on the nose. The first missile out flies the longest path. The last out flies the shortest. All 8 arrive inside the same 5-second window. That's not luck. That's a planning cell solving 8 routes backward from a single second on a clock. It's the kind of homework only the United States Navy assigns itself and then aces before breakfast. Now run the defender's math. A radar beam slews in a heartbeat. A fresh track file has to be built from scratch every new target. Those are the seconds the Bavar bought with its silence. 4 bearings roughly 90 degrees apart arrive inside 5 seconds. One radar physically can't finish 2 of those fights. Reloading a launcher runs half an hour or more, so that clock isn't on the table at all. A defender can fight 1 bearing, pivot, track, shoot. 4 at once turn every remaining gun and launcher into a spectator. Aim at 1, turn your back on 3. That's not an engagement, that's a dunk tank. The Navy's name for this is just what it sounds like: time on target. 4 punches thrown from 4 angles, aimed to land as 1. There's no blocking stance for that. 60 seconds. The site's perimeter fence comes over the horizon of 8 seeker heads at once. Here's what's standing at Darkovan: a crane line, excavated foundations, a concrete batching plant, and lay-down yards stacked with rebar and steel forms. The shape of that target tells you why this is a Navy job and not a bomber run. That target is a hardened cavern under a mountain, and a smaller warhead would have scarred the hillside without touching what mattered. Darkovan is the opposite problem: above ground, early construction, years away from holding any nuclear fuel. What matters here isn't penetration, it's blast and fragmentation, placed precisely against soft industrial hardware. Each Tomahawk carries a 1,000-pound unitary warhead, PBXN-107 high explosive packed inside a fragmenting steel case. When it goes off at ground level, it slams out a blast wave above 20 psi to about 50 feet, enough to fold a tower crane's lattice like a straw, and its steel wrecks equipment past 200. Each one lands inside 10 meters of its aim point, call it 30 feet, and that's why 8 small warheads beat one huge one here. A 30,000-pound bomb can only be in one place. 8 1,000-pounders placed meters from 8 separate targets wreck the schedule, not just the dirt. You don't rent a pile driver just to push in a thumbtack. At 0542 local time, the lead Tomahawk buries its warhead into the reactor foundation excavation, and the other impacts arrive within a single second of it. The crane line folds. Dust boils over the batching plant. The laydown yard turns its own rebar stacks into shrapnel. The shockwave rolls across the floodplain. 10 miles up the Ahvaz road, the bus windows buzz in their frames. In the final seconds, every Tomahawk stops trusting its map and looks. A camera in the nose photographs the ground and slides a reference image across the live frame until the pixels line up. However far the picture has to slide is exactly how far off course the missile is, and the autopilot flies that error to 0. No satellite required. Tomahawk 6's camera finds its mark and calls for a hard left. The torn outboard surface can't produce the roll the autopilot asked for. The missile banks shallow, turns slow, and runs out of sky before the correction finishes. Meters of error grow to 100 at impact. The seeker knows exactly where to go, but the wing can't take it there. On the flagship, the last data burst arrives and the display goes quiet. The strike controller marks the time and stands up. Iranian air defense fired every shot physics allowed, and their newest reactor site still became the next parking lot. If you enjoyed this video, then watch this one about the first time America destroyed Iran's nuclear facilities. Bye for now.